There once was a time in which all imaginable religions were being practiced in Arabia, from animism to polytheism, from Zoroastrianism to Judaism and Christianity. Arabia was a land of diversity, fragmented into hundreds of tribes, mostly at peace among each other. Religious diversity was so intertwined and chaotic, though, that at one point, the Kaaba, today the most important pilgrimage site in Islam, was said to have been surrounded by hundreds of idols and images of polytheistic deities. Inside the Kaaba, on its walls, a pair of ram's horns and paintings of Mary holding Jesus, of Abraham, of angels, and of polytheistic tribal deities from all over Arabia could be found. When Muhammad returned to Mecca from Medina with his army of Muslim followers, he defeated the ruling tribe of Mecca, the Quraysh. He demolished the idols of the deities that surrounded the Kaaba, and in some accounts, it is said that he spared the paintings of Abraham, Jesus, and Mary for a while, as a sign of respect, but later removed them to not confuse the focus of Muslims on any other than Allah. Years later, the Muslim armies would continue in Muhammad's intents, spreading Islam from Mecca and Medina to the furthest corners of the Arabian Peninsula. Temples of pagan deities were destroyed, sacred trees were cut, sacred rocks were smashed, and the books mentioning them burned. Entire civilizations' histories and cultures were forgotten in the span of a decade. Animism and polytheism were eradicated. Many were forced to convert. Many others willfully chose to do so, with some even happy to let the past go. Monotheism had prevailed. The Jahiliyyah, or Age of Ignorance, how the early Muslim authors would later write in their books to refer to this period, a period in which humans willfully chose to pray to statues rather than to the only God, Allah, had come to an end. Muhammad achieved to do what nobody else achieved before: the union of Arabia, with Islam as its glue. Islam became the dominant religion of Arabia, and in the span of a few centuries would be destined to spread tenfold to the remotest areas of our planet. Fast forward to today, the followers of Islam amount to almost 2 billion and growing. Though, while writing the script for this documentary, I couldn't help but notice in amazement that while Muhammad united so many people under one belief, so little at the same time has Islam actually changed from that period of supposed darkness and chaos. The year is 500 AD, a century before Islam would begin its fiery expansion across the world. The most powerful entity in the region, the Roman Empire, has split, and the western part of it has fallen, creating a power vacuum that numerous entities are now eager to fill. The Eastern Roman Empire is desperately striving to recover what has been lost. However, its continuous conflicts with the Sassanid Empire, which have been dragging on for the past centuries, have depleted the emperor's treasury, leading to a general sense of panic. In this conflict, both sides, the Romans and the Sassanids, tried to drag their Arab allies into the conflict. On one side, the Romans supported by the Hassanids, an Arab Christian state. On the other side, the Zoroastrian Sassanids, supported by the Arab polytheistic kingdom of the Latmides. Since the Romans converted to Christianity, many missionaries have been sent far and wide to spread Christianity and to bring in new allies. One of the main targets being the tribes of Arabia, a useful buffer region that, if converted, would have proved decisive in the fight against the Sassanids. The concerted efforts of Roman Christian missionaries led entire regions of northern and central Arabia to adopt Christianity, including many cities of the Hijaz until as far south as Yemen. As if that was not enough, since the Romans defeated the Jews in the Battle of Bar Kokhba and destroyed their temples, persecuting them and leading them out of Judea, Jews have started to escape in all directions, seeking refuge predominantly in Arabia, as Arabia was known to be a region highly tolerant of all religions. The city of Yathrib, modern-day Medina, was said to have a substantial Jewish population, and so was the Jewish presence considerable in many towns of the Hijaz and in Mecca. But what is more curious is that the Himyarite kingdom, the kingdom which was controlling modern-day Yemen, the strongest and wealthiest of the Arabian Peninsula, had fully converted to Judaism exactly 1 century prior. This is very important, because, according to the Atlas of World Population History, by demographers Colin McKevity and Richard Jones, if the population of the Arabian Peninsula was truly between 3 to 4 million, of which half in Yemen alone, Judaism may have been, at one point, the predominant religion of the Arabian Peninsula at large, while Arab polytheism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism, the prevailing religions of what is modern-day Saudi Arabia. In summary, Arabia was a melting pot of different religions, in which there were Arab Christians due to Roman and Christian missionaries' influence, a Zoroastrian minority of Arabs due to Sassanid influence, and Jewish Arabs due to the Jewish influence of Jews settling in the region to escape Roman persecution. But what about the Arab polytheists and their original beliefs? Pre-Islamic Arabs led an extremely different lifestyle compared to other civilizations of the same time period. While most civilizations around the world consisted of farmers working from sunrise to sunset, the Arabs, faced with scarce arable land, were compelled towards a nomadic lifestyle from the earliest times. Consequently, they mostly engaged in transporting goods between empires, typically traveling from sunset to sunrise under the guidance of the moon to avoid the daytime heat of the desert. To clarify, in the south of Arabia, cargo from India and East Africa was collected in Yemen, placed on caravans, and then transported through the mountains and deserts of the Hijaz to the Levant. Upon arrival, the ports of Gaza, Tyre, Sidon, and those in Egypt would forward these goods to their final buyers in Europe. Simultaneously, in the north of the Arabian Peninsula, Arabs were facilitating trade from China, India, and Central Asia, bound for Europe via the Silk Road through the Syrian desert. The strategic position of the Arabian Peninsula, situated amidst the mightiest civilizations of the period, on one side, the Romans, and on the other, the Indians and the Chinese, combined with the lack of agricultural land, which did not allow Arabs to create large urban settlements, enabled Arabs to capitalize on their nomadic lifestyle and to become exceptionally wealthy traders. The fact that the ancient Arab tribes were entrusted with the transport of goods across the Arabian Peninsula suggests a level of organization, reliability, and security that was highly recognized to Arabs by such foreign civilizations. In fact, although divided by numerous faiths and ethnicities, the ancient Arabs were surprisingly very pragmatic, going far and beyond to tolerate whatever the other tribes, including foreigners, might have believed in, as long as the trading routes were kept safe. But how did they encourage tolerance to safeguard the trade routes? Throughout the millennia, Arab nomads established numerous temples along the trading routes. These temples, known as harem, were built almost exclusively near water sources and encompassed vast areas of greenery, such as water springs, wells, oases, giant trees, and mangroves. These areas were declared hima, inviolable spaces where humans could not pick any fruits, hunt any animals, or commit any evil acts, lest they incur the wrath of the deities. Such temples provided merchants with places to rest, to gather, to discuss business, to refill their water supplies, and to pray to luck and protective deities for a prosperous journey. Most importantly, as each tribe brought their own deities in the form of stone idols along the journey and placed them in such temples, these temples could have housed dozens or even hundreds of deities at once. This arrangement ensured that no tribe wanted to initiate aggression, as they were deterred by the prospect of disappointing their own gods enshrined within such temples. The best example of this is the Temple of the Kaaba in Mecca, located at the center of the incense trade route from Yemen to the Levant. During this period, it was managed by a tribe known as the Quraysh. According to Sirat Rasulallah, the biography of Prophet Muhammad by Ibn Ishaq, as edited by Ibn Hisham, in Al-Sirah al-Nabawiyah, we read, Allah sent his apostle when he was 60 years old, and Mecca at that time was a sanctuary to which the Arabs made pilgrimage, and in which they placed their idols, which they venerated and to which they sacrificed. And they had 360 deities which they worshipped. Then, in the same text, we read that on the day Mecca was conquered, the apostle was standing by the idols with a stick in his hand, saying, "The truth has come, and falsehood has passed away." Then he pointed at them with his stick, and the idols collapsed on their backs, one after the other. In the same text, we also read, "The Quraysh had an idol by a well in the middle of the Kaaba called Hubal. Hubal was an image in the middle of the Kaaba, indeed the greatest of their images. If anyone wanted to circumcise a boy, or arrange a marriage, or bury a body, or doubted someone's genealogy, or needed to make an important decision, or had a legal argument to clarify, they would go to Hubal with 100 dirhams and a camel for sacrifice. They were then given to the priest in charge of an istiqsam to ascertain the answer from the god of Hubal. For instance, in the case of a dispute between merchants over a payment, the arrows were 7 and marked with yes, no, me, you, and the other 3 void. The priest would mix them in the quiver and pick randomly or throw them at the statue of Hubal, and the contestants had to accept the lot as Hubal's impartial divine decision. Whenever a significant decision needed to be made, after a hefty sacrifice, disputes were settled in front of its statue. It is said that once, the Quraysh tribe offered 100 camels to Hubal before participating in the Battle of Badr against the Muslims. Legend has it that the blood of the sacrificed animals and the treasures obtained from such disputes were thrown into a well at the center of the Kaaba called Al-Asaf. As stated previously, temples were built either on top of or nearby natural water sources, so it should not come as a surprise that the Kaaba too was built on a well, the Al-Asaf, which later dried up and was used only for ritual sacrifices. At the time of Muhammad, the Kaaba was described as a squat, roofless building made of unmortared stones, situated in a valley of sand. But who built it and when? We don't know yet, and unfortunately, we may never know. But we do have a clue. According to the Iranian scholar Al-Tabari, who documented the migrations of Arabs in the Arabian Peninsula in his book History of the Prophets and Kings, there have been recurring waves of migrants from Yemen settling in the Hijaz throughout the millennia. As stated earlier, Yemen was the most advanced and populous region of the Arabian Peninsula. Within this geographical area, several highly advanced kingdoms thrived. The Kingdom of Ma'ain, the Kingdom of Saba, the Kingdom of Qataban, the Kingdom of Hadramaut. These kingdoms were gradually absorbed by the Himyarite Kingdom, which converted to Judaism. What is fascinating is that these kingdoms practiced agriculture and had advanced architectural techniques. In fact, in the 8th century BC, the Sabaeans built the Ma'arib Dam, enabling the kingdom to support an incredible population of 50,000 people. Unfortunately, after nearly 1,000 years of operation, the dam collapsed in 540 AD, killing thousands and displacing the Sabaean population northward into the Hijaz. Moreover, several years earlier, between 400 and 500 AD, the volcano Hera of Erhab near Sana'a in Yemen erupted, displacing thousands more into the Hijaz. As if this was not enough, once the Himyarite kingdom had assimilated these kingdoms, it began persecuting the Christian community of Najran, leading to a response from the Ethiopian kingdom of Aksum, which conquered Himyar in 525 AD, causing even more migrants to flee north. Islamic historical sources recount that these migrants, particularly the Jurhum tribe, may have arrived in what is now Mecca and expelled the local inhabitants, known as Al-Amalika, likely Bedouins. The Jurhumites positioned their principal deity, Zuhal, at the forefront of the Kaaba, which apparently already existed before their arrival. Zuhal, linked to agriculture and Saturn, embodies healthy growth, a symbolism derived from Saturn's slow orbit. Notably, the name Zuhal translates to slow in Old South Arabian. Later, Another tribe from Yemen, the Khuza'a, settled in the area, assimilated the Jurhum tribe, and established the deity Manaf, a mountain god, at the head of the Kaaba, whose name means highest. The tribe of Khuza'a is said to have controlled Mecca for over 400 years. Lastly, before being assimilated by the Quraysh in the 5th century, it is said that the tribe of Khuza'a introduced the deity Hubal to the head of the Kaaba, a god from the Roman province of Syria-Palestina, suggesting Hubal to be of Syrian origin. If you've already watched our documentary, God's Insane Historical Evolution, from Mesopotamia to Modern Times, you've likely noticed that Hubal, or Baal, was by far the most prevalent deity across the Middle East. Originally known amongst the Mesopotamians as Bel, meaning Lord, symbolized by a bull and thunder, which bestowed upon him the attribute of warrior. Baal-Hadad was the preeminent deity of rainfall and war in the Middle East. This deity was referred to as Baal by the Canaanites and the Ugaridians, and as Bull in Syria. Moreover, the North Arabians called him Al-Hadad, and to the South Arabians as Hadam and Baal. His Mesopotamian epithet, Ramanu, literally thunderer, was recognized among the Arameans of Syria as Rimmon, Raman to the Sabaeans, and Raman or Ramanan to the South Arabians, translating to the merciful, for bringing water to their fields. The earliest recorded use of Raman dates back to the 8th century BCE in Akkadian inscription dedicated to Baal-Hadad. In the kingdom of Himyar, it was common for Jews, Christians, and pagan Arabs alike to refer to Jesus as the son of Ramanan, also found in Hebrew as Harahaman. This title later became one of the most common epithets for Allah, Ar-Rahman, the Merciful. The Kaaba also housed another deity associated with water, Al-Ba'ali, known for its connection to plants growing in inhospitable terrains, because nourished by underground water sources. Interestingly, the term Ba'ali persists in modern Arabic to describe rainfall agriculture, which remains the predominant agricultural method in Arabia today, due to water being sourced from underground aquifers. Furthermore, also Hubal may be translated as water spring or vapor. Karen Armstrong, a renowned British author and expert in comparative religions, postulates that the 360 deities contained in the Kaaba likely represented the days of the lunar calendar year. Moreover, it is thought that the Quraysh tribe may have added the idols of Abraham, Jesus, and Mary to the Kaaba to acknowledge Christianity and Judaism and to attract Christian and Jewish traders to Mecca. According to the Book of Idols by Hisham ibn al-Kabi, there were at least 4 other Kaabas around Arabia, apart from the Kaaba in Mecca, which housed the Black Stone. The Kaaba of Najran, owned by the tribe of Al-Harith. The author, however, mentions, "I also heard that it was a hall for the poets." The Kaaba of Sindad, owned by the tribe of Ilid in Mesopotamia. The author clarifies, "I have, however, heard that this house was not a place of worship. Rather, it was a celebrated edifice." The Kaaba of Gaiman, where locals venerated a red stone. And the Kaaba of Dul Halasa, also known as Al-Abalat, or Kaaba of Yemen, located in the modern-day city of Tabala, which contained a white stone. The Kaaba of Yemen, Dul Halasa, was particularly hated by Prophet Muhammad, and thus, in Sahih al-Bukhari 4355 we read, "In the pre-Islamic period of ignorance, there was a house called Dul Halasa, or Al-Ka'aba al-Yamaniya. The Prophet said to me, 'Won't you relieve me from Dul Halasa?' So I set out with 150 horsemen, and we demolished it and killed whoever was present there. Then I came to the Prophet and informed him, and he invoked good upon us and on my tribe." The Kaaba of Dul Halasa was very similar, if not identical to the Kaaba of Mecca. In fact, arrow divination was there too, was practiced, and when Jarir arrived, he threatened the local priest, thus saying, "Break them, and testify that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah, or else I will chop off your neck." So the man broke the arrows and testified that none has the right to be worshipped except Allah. Cube-shaped temples may have been very common in the Middle East before idolatry was eradicated. In fact, in Iran, there is the Kaaba of Zoroaster, which is similarly shaped and had a similar function, dating back to 500 BCE. A common ritual among Arab polytheists was the practice of tawaf, which involves circumambulating an object several times, as we read here. We used to worship stones. When we found a stone superior to the first, we would discard the original in favor of the new one. If no stones were available, we would gather soil, milk a sheep over it, mix the two, and then perform tawaf around it. The practice of tawaf was most significant during pilgrimages to the temples, particularly during the Hajj pilgrimage. During this ritual, ancient polytheist Arabs would shave their heads, mix the hair with wheat to make bread to offer to the deity, and perform tawaf, circumambulating 7 times around the Kaaba, without clothes, or with ritual clothes called ihram. This act likely emulated the movements of stars and planets in the sky, as we will see in Chapter 2, and was probably intended to ask the gods for rain. The tawaf was not performed solely around the Kaaba. Whenever a baby was born, the leader among the Bedouins would take the child in his arms, hold him high, and walk 7 times around the tent. This was done while praying to the gods that the female devil, known as as-Subian, notorious for causing infants to die and women to miscarry, would not harm the baby. A similar practice to tawaf is found in Hinduism, known as pradakshina, where worshippers walk around a temple several times, offer their hair, and wear ritual attire. This practice is mirrored in Buddhism, referred to as kora, symbolizing harmony with the motion of the sun across the sky, and symbolically the spread of the teachings of the Buddha throughout the universe. A comparable tradition was also observed in Zoroastrianism, where circumambulation was performed around temples, such as the Kaaba of Zoroaster. With the establishment of Islam, we find a reference in Sahih al-Bukhari 18365, narrated by Abu Huraira. No pagan is allowed to perform Hajj after this year, and no naked person is allowed to perform the tawaf around the Kaaba. At that time, the following verse was added to the Quran. The polytheists are impure. Let them not approach the holy mosque after this year. Once the Hajj concluded, it was typically followed by poetry competitions and fairs, where merchants could engage in trade. Another ritual practiced by Arab polytheists was that of Ramadan. To prevent droughts, Arab polytheists may have believed that by refraining from consuming the environment's resources, and thus the resources of the gods might have grown more respectful towards humans, rewarding them with water. This belief was not limited to humans alone. Since gazelles reproduce very quickly, even in such environments, tribes often circumambulated around mountains and ritually hunted gazelles to reduce their numbers, and as such, the consumption of water, believing it actively promoted rainfall. Philip Jenkins, professor of historical studies of religion at Pennsylvania State University, suggests that the observance of Ramadan might have been influenced by the Syrian churches, which were known for their rigorous observance of Lent. This involved eating only 1 meal after sunset for the 40 days leading up to Easter. Furthermore, according to the Book of Idols by Hisham ibn al-Kalbi, it is noted that the tribe of Tayyi abstained from drinking and eating as a symbol of respect towards the deity Al-Ya'bub. Having reached this point, you may wonder, why did Arabs worship stones as their gods? Archaeologist Uzi Avner from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem notes in his research, Nabatean standing stones and their interpretation, that the worship of sacred stones was prevalent among Semitic-speaking peoples in general, not just among pagan Arabs. This worship was mostly directed towards unworked stone blocks with uncommon shapes, a practice technically known as fetishism, which involves attributing supernatural powers to inanimate objects. Among the most commonly worshipped stones were tall monoliths, known as ansab, which literally means to be stood upright. Smaller stones used for prayer in the North Arabian kingdom of Nabatea, termed masjida, a term that translates to place of prostration. And duar, object of circumambulation, stones around which Semitic people performed tawaf. These deities were often represented by freestanding slabs, on which faces, especially in Nabatea, and astral symbols, particularly in South Arabia, were drawn. Kingdoms under the influence of Greeks and Romans, such as the Kingdom of Nabatea, also developed statues in human shape, like the famous statue of the Nabatean main god, Dul Shara. Any oddly shaped stones, uncut blocks, rock formations, or meteorites were believed to be inhabited by a spirit or deity. In Jewish tradition, standing stones are known by the terms matzeva and maseba. These maseba were placed on graves to mark the location of the dead and to eternalize the memory of the deceased, or to entrap their souls in such stones. In Arabic, these objects were known as Baitullah, meaning house of the deity. Worship was not directed at the physical object itself, but at the god or spirit believed to inhabit it. The Semites referred to these objects as Bethel, and introduced them to the Greeks and Romans as Baitulis. This is also why the Kaaba in Mecca is called Kaaba Baitullah. According to Abdul Muntir in Sirat Rasulallah, every household in the city of Mecca in pre-Islamic times had its own household deity in the form of a betil. Before setting out on a journey, the family member would touch the betil to ensure a safe journey. Upon returning, he or she would kiss or touch the betil as a thank you for the safe return. Furthermore, at the Kaaba in pre-Islamic Mecca, a group of women known as the Sayyida were responsible for weaving and renewing the clothes that adorned the idols and betils of the Kaaba. Uzi Avner also writes that, whenever a traveler stopped at a place or station to rest and spend the night, he would select 4 stones, choose the finest among these as his god, and use the other 3 to support his cooking pot. In the Book of Idols, Ibn al-Kalbi describes the rituals of pre-Islamic Arabs surrounding such sacred stones, including performing animal sacrifices. To attract the attention of the deities, the blood of the animals was spilled on the sacred stone, and the circumambulations were performed around it. Uzi Avner's research also notes that betils come in different sizes and groups. Wider and shorter betils are linked to goddesses, while thin and tall betils are linked to gods. Moreover, the size and grouping of the betils may indicate not only their gender, but also their role of authority and importance. Furthermore, Avner observes an important detail about the stones dedicated to prayer through prostration, known as masjida. While Nabatean standing stones have no specific orientation, in North Arabia, standing stones tend to either point east, where the sun rises, or have their back to a mountain. Thus, when a believer kneels to pray in front of a masjida, he is facing the mountain ahead. During his trip to Indonesia in 1999, Avner states that he found a similar concept of stone orientation in Balinese Hinduism. In Bali, there are many shrines, or at least one in every house, and several in every temple, featuring empty thrones of 3 different types: Tugu, Padmasari, and Padmasana, prepared for an invisible and iconic god. Sometimes, a crude standing stone is placed on them. These stones are oriented with their backs to Gunung Agung, the tallest and most sacred mountain on the island, even when the mountain is not directly visible. Others face with their backs to the second tallest mountain, Batu Karu. This orientation is referred to as Kaja, meaning to the highest. Similar shrines are also found in Hindu villages in Java, he writes. Now that you're familiar with the basics of pre-Islamic polytheism, let me introduce you to the 3 most important gods, the famous 3 daughters of Allah, and to the remaining deities of Arabia, before diving into the origins of Allah himself. Ask them, O Prophet, if your Lord has daughters, while the pagans prefer to have sons. Have you considered the goddesses Alat and Al-Uzza, and the third one, Manat, as well? You prefer to have sons, while you attribute to him daughters. This is truly an unfair distribution. These goddesses are nothing but names that you and your forefathers have made up, a practice Allah has never authorized. They follow no reason, but inherited assumptions in whatever their souls desire, although true guidance has already come to them from their Lord. Early Muslims questioned the pagans' logic with severe disdain. Pagans prized having many sons and felt shameful for having many daughters. Yet, ironically, they attributed only daughters to Allah. How could they think this was the right thing to do? While Hubal was the chief deity of the Kaaba in Mecca, it was not the most important deity among Arab polytheists outside of Mecca. In fact, its worship was limited to the Quraysh tribe, who were governing the Kaaba at that time. Arab polytheists outside of Mecca believed in many deities, but none were more iconic to them than the triad of the three goddesses, Alat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. To the North Arabians, she was known as Azum al-Aliha, Mother of the Gods, and Arabat, the Lady. The Himyarites called her Atiratan and Elat, while in Syria, she was known as Alat. In Canaan, she was referred to as Asherah, and to the Phoenicians as Aretseya. She embodied Ard and Aretz, representing the earth itself. Alat was a widely revered deity across the Middle East, associated with the fertility of the soil, breathing life into the otherwise inhospitable deserts. Her temple, located in the city of Taif, not far from Mecca, was represented by a square block of stone, known as the Garden of Hijaz. Her temple was celebrated for its beautiful flora and fauna, thought to be a blessing bestowed by the deity. Within her garden, humans were forbidden from picking any fruits, hunting animals, or committing evil acts, lest they incur the wrath of the goddess. Her temple was a pilgrimage site, thereby fostering trade. Her name most likely means the goddess. One particular note is that goddesses similar to her tended to be not just the most important goddesses, but almost always also the wives of the most important gods, called the highest gods in the Semitic tradition. For instance, Elat is the wife of El in the Ugaritic tradition. Asherah is the wife of El Elyon in the Canaanite tradition. Ashratum is the wife of Amaru in the Amorite tradition. This prompted academics to theorize that if Elat was the wife of El, then Alat, rather than being his daughter, must have been the wife of Allah, the highest god in pre-Islamic times, from whom all the Arab deities were born. Another curious mention is that the Carthaginians also knew her as Alatu, and the Hurrians in the Anatolian Peninsula as Alani. Her temple was destroyed under the orders of Prophet Muhammad, who prohibited trade within the city of Taif until the local tribe agreed to demolish her idol and to convert to Islam. Symbolized by 3 acacia trees, in the ancient city of Nahala, Al-Uzza was the pagan goddess of protection associated with the planet Venus, encompassing aspects from war and health recovery to love within marriage. Worshippers sought the deity's favor in various ways. Some sacrificed animals, pouring their blood onto stone slabs as offerings for assistance in warfare, while others brought small golden images, appealing to the deity's compassion for their ailing children. The dual nature of Al-Uzza encompasses both the warrior's strength and the nurturing care of a mother, illustrating a unique blend of 2 contrasting aspects. Her origins are likely influenced by Mesopotamian deities, particularly the goddess Ishtar, who was notably prevalent in the Middle East. As the goddess of love, fertility, and sexuality, Ishtar was associated with nature's generative forces. Simultaneously, as the goddess of war and combat, she embodied chaotic and destructive forces, symbolizing the unity of opposites in which matter is simultaneously created and destroyed. The dual nature of Al-Uzza and Ishtar likely stemmed from the movements of Venus in the sky. Venus appears in the morning sky for a few months before disappearing, either because it is behind or too close to the sun, and then reappears in the evening sky for several months. This movement, resembling a dance from one horizon to the other, symbolized the transformation in her mood. Consequently, it was also believed that she was both male and female, or that she had a son named Athtar to represent the opposite part of her personality. In Central Arabia, where Mesopotamian religious influences were most pronounced, Allat and Al-Uzza were regarded as the same deity. Allat symbolized the creative side, while Al-Uzza embodied the destructive aspect. After the establishment of Islam, the Prophet Muhammad commanded Khalid ibn al-Walid to go to Nahala and slay the pre-Islamic Arabian goddess Al-Uzza, believed to dwell within one of the 3 trees. Legend has it that Khalid destroyed the first tree and reported back to Muhammad, who inquired if anything unusual had occurred, to which Khalid denied. The same happened after the second tree was cut down. Upon attempting to fell the last tree, an enraged woman appeared, identified by the temple's custodian as Al-Uzza. Khalid struck her with his sword, decapitating her. He then killed the custodian and cut down the third tree, leading Muhammad to proclaim the end of her worship. Manat is the eldest among the 3 sisters, an old, fragile, skinny lady who practices magic and shamanism, second in age only to Allah himself. As an old lady, wise from her life experiences, she determines the fate of the living and writes the destiny of how they will die, as implied by her name in Old Arabic, Mana, which means the one who determines. It was believed that an oath made in her name was the most solemn, because lying in her name would inevitably lead to the end of one's life. Once someone died, Manat, along with her sisters, Kaisha and Taraha, would oversee the graves of the dead to ensure that nobody could return to the living, prevent grave robbing, and cast curses on anyone who stole and sold the contents of such graves. Her main idol was housed in a temple called Al-Mushallal, located halfway between Mecca and Yathrib. The local tribes would perform hajjah to honor her, shave their heads, and mix the hair with wheat to make bread for the deity. This act symbolized a change in their lives. They would also perform tawaf, unclothed to cleanse themselves of past sins. To Arab pagans, Manat represented the antithesis of Dahr, also known as Zaman. While Manat symbolized decisions made through time, Zaman personified time itself, moving aimlessly without purpose or goal, embodying the certainty of death where no decisions are made. This stagnant entity was viewed negatively by pagan Arabs, which was not worshipped, but feared as a relentless force towards the decay of matter. The trio of sisters, Allat, who creates, Al-Uzza, who both destroys and protects, and Manat, who decides and determines life's end, mirrors the concept of the Greek Moirai and the Roman Parche. In the ancient Greek framework, the Moirai consisted of Clotho, who spun the thread of life, akin to Allat, enabling life to emerge, Lachesis, who measured the thread of life, paralleling Al-Uzza's role in safeguarding it for a determined duration, and Atropos, who cut the thread of life, determining death, similar to how Manat marks the end of things and time, and ensures that no one escapes from their grave. Curiously, the husband of Manat, worshipped in Muzdalifa, Kuza was a god of thunderstorms and clouds. Kuza was imagined as a giant archer residing in the clouds who, with his bow, would launch hailstones at the demonic spirits known as Shaitan, and use the roar of thunder as his battle cry to prevent these malevolent spirits from congregating in the clouds. The people of Mecca believed the rainbow, appearing after a thunderstorm, to be a ladder to the heavens. Even today, the term Qaz Quza, meaning bow of Quza, is used in modern Arabic to refer to a rainbow. Quza is thought to have originated from Kos, the thunderstorm deity of the Edomites. Among the Nabateans, Kos was portrayed flanked by bulls and brandishing a thunderbolt. During Ramadan, the Quraysh tribe was known to celebrate a feast called Ifada in Muzdalifa, as part of the rainmaking rituals known as Istiqsa. Lastly, in the same month that Khalid ibn al-Walid was sent to destroy the 3 acacia tree temple of Al-Uzza, an ex-pagan by the name of Saad bin Zaid was commanded to go to Al-Mushallal to eliminate Manat. According to legend, a black woman appeared before him, unclothed, with disheveled hair, wailing and beating her chest. Saad immediately killed her, destroyed the idol, and broke the casket, then returned to his tribe. apart from Hubal, the principal deity of the Kaaba in Mecca, and the three goddesses, Alat, Al-Uzza, and Manat, who were central to the pagan faith across hundreds of miles around Mecca. In the north, south, and east of Arabia, three types of very practical deities associated with astronomical objects were worshipped: Venusian deities, solar deities, and lunar deities. The worship of these astronomical objects may have had origins in the Mesopotamian tradition, which influenced Arabia for thousands of years up to that point. In fact, the most common name for the sun deity in Arabia was Shams, while Shamash was the Mesopotamian equivalent. The most common name for the moon goddess was Sain in Arabia, with Sin being the Mesopotamian equivalent. The planet Venus, associated with Ishtar in Mesopotamia, held similar importance for the Arabs. However, the Arabs mainly focused on her son or male personality Athtar, thought to bring rain. In fact, since Mesopotamian times, the sun, moon, and Venus have been meticulously observed due to their size and brightness in the sky. The sun, large and bright, illuminates the day, while the moon, to our eyes similarly large, lights up the night. Venus, on the contrary, was often mistaken for the brightest star, receiving the nicknames Morning Star and Evening Star. Furthermore, the movements of the sun, moon, and Venus were so predictable that our ancestors, by measuring these movements, not only designed calendars around them to identify the most optimal periods for sowing and harvesting, but also created religious celebrations to remind farmers of such crucial dates. The sun and the moon seem to alternate in the sky, marking the passage of day and night. The moon undergoes a cycle of phases: new moon, first quarter, full moon, and last quarter, which lasts nearly 30 days. The ancients observed that after 12 moons, our planet was almost back in the same position, marking 1 year. Furthermore, the orbit of Venus in the sky, which takes 19 moons, as mentioned previously in the paragraph about Al-Uzza, of Athtar in the position of morning star, most often marked the arrival of the rainy season. Other civilizations, such as the Aztecs and Mayans, among others, made similar calculations, and similarly perceived Venus as both a warrior deity and a fertility deity, determining the months left before the arrival of rainfall. But this is not all. When the Arabs observed the goddess Athuraya in the sky, namely the cluster of the Pleiades, rising on the horizon, they would ascend mountains to pray, as the appearance of the Pleiades most likely signified the arrival of the rainy season. Moreover, the tribes of Misam and Tamim believed that the star Aldebaran, which they called Aldebaran, was the lover and follower of Athuraya, the goddess of the Pleiades. If Aldebaran in the Taurus constellation had a heliacal rising unaccompanied by rain, it was, unfortunately, considered an omen of drought. Most importantly, by far, is the star of Sirius. Its heliacal rising in ancient Egypt on the 19th of July marks the onset of the Nile's flooding, heralding the arrival of water. Similarly, in the same period in Yemen, the monsoons bring rain. Sirius, being the brightest star, known as Ash-Shira to the Arabs, was also crucial for navigating the deserts at night. Its complete disappearance indicated that the clouds were so thick that rain was almost guaranteed. Sirius was worshipped to such a degree by Arab pagans that it was later stated in the Quran, and he alone is the Lord of Sirius. On the contrary, the star Algol, which the Arabs called Al-Ul, translated as the demon, is a bright star in the constellation of Perseus and one of the first non-nova variable stars to be discovered. This peculiar characteristic of being very bright, then fading and twinkling, even disappearing during a clear night sky, was a cause for concern. When Algol faded in the sky, it was believed that the demon descended to the earth, attacking the graves of the beloved dead ones in the cemeteries, devouring their corpses, and preying upon children and lone travelers in the deserts. Arabs would never go into battle if the light of Algol was weak. Moreover, as deities were thought to reside on the planets, Mercury, being the fastest orbiting planet, was associated with a messenger delivering messages between planets. In Mesopotamian mythology, he was known as Nabu, son of the high deity Marduk, and his name meant the announcer, or the authorized one. He was a god of prophecies, wisdom, writing, and law. In the Semitic tradition, such among Israelites, Aramaeans, and Arabs, the god Nabu, son of Marduk, became the most common word to refer to prophets, calling them Nabi, like Nabi Muhammad. Mars, due to its red color, was commonly associated with blood and war. Jupiter, being the largest planet visible to our naked eyes, was seen as a patron deity. Its slow orbit was believed to guarantee slow and healthy growth of one's luck and riches. While Saturn, the slowest orbiting visible planet, was associated with healthy agricultural growth and fertility, but also with the underworld below, where the dead resided. Lastly, although the sun was respected, it was not revered due to its constant presence in the sky, which mostly caused discomfort. By far, the deity closest to humans was the moon, known as Sayin, and also referred to as Hilal, Qamar, Waraq, and Wad in different regions of Arabia. The moon provided relief from the daily heat, guided merchants and shepherds at night, reflected light to reveal distant oases, and was believed to cause orchards to bloom in the desert. In Mesopotamian traditions, the moon and god Nana, known to the Akkadians as Sin, was a pastoral deity. He was also called Abkar, meaning the shining cow, and Ablulu, the one who makes cows abundant, imagined in the sky as a herdsman, with the stars poetically described as his herd. As you may have understood, our ancestors were truly pragmatic, and modern astrology bears almost no resemblance to its ancient counterpart. The main aim of ancient astrology was to determine, through the movements of astronomical objects, the arrival of rain, and to identify the most optimal periods for sowing and harvesting. You have surely heard that our ancestors observed the movements of birds in the sky to predict the future, a practice known as orthomancy. But what kind of future exactly? Once again, the primary focus was on predicting the rainy season. The movement of the birds determines the changing of seasons and the incoming thunderstorm that frightens them. Trees were also held sacred in pre-Islamic Arabia, not only for indicating where water could be found underground, since where there are trees there is water, but also for many ecosystems that support insects and animals to thrive. Arab polytheists revered small thorny trees about the height of a man called zawur, upon which they hung strips of cloth. Bedouins worshipped such trees to bring rain and sacrificed animals in front of them to cure a sick family member. Other trees, known as manahil, were believed to be places where angels descended to rest and in which spirits dwelled. It was thought that while angels rested on their branches, they would inadvertently drop bits of divine messages intended for the deities. Consequently, anyone resting below such trees could receive a prophetic dream. Pagans also paid homage to Dahatu Anwad, a Meccan tree goddess, symbolized by a large lotus idol located halfway between Mecca and Yathrib, by hanging their swords and jewelry on the branches of her trees. Moreover, in the later Islamic theology, there are the Shajarat al-Hayat, the Tree of Life, and the Sidrat al-Muntaha, believed to mark the boundary of the seventh heaven beyond which no creation can pass, alongside the Tuba tree in heaven, which is believed to bear all worldly fruits. While the worship of Hubal, of the three daughters of Allah, and of astronomical objects can be traced back to Semitic and Mesopotamian influences, the most ancient deities native to Arabia are the jinns. Jinns are believed to originate from a legendary mountain situated at the Earth's edge, known as Mount Kaf. This mountain is said to have been ruled by Jan ibn Jan, the most ancient of the jinn, and the progenitor of all jinns. Jinns are personifications of natural and inanimate forces, such as a rock moving by itself or a river flowing, believed not to possess souls. They are said to be made of smokeless fire, and their voices to be the wind in the deserts. Jinns are neither inherently good nor bad, but they possess free will, similar to humans, and are subject to judgment by the gods at the end of time. Jinns coexist with us in this world, but on a metaphysical plane that prevents us from seeing them. They inhabit oases, water springs, and rocks, and on rare occasions may possess animals and humans, allegedly bestowing upon them artistic qualities such as poetry and prophetic revelations. To avoid being attacked by them, it is said that Arabs, believing jinns resided in bushes, upon encountering a bush, would throw a stone into it to scare the jinn and ensure it remained inside. Animals, especially snakes, were held deeply sacred by the jinns. If a man killed a snake, he would need to seek forgiveness by preparing a statue of a camel, filling it with barley and dates, and placing it on a mountain. The jinn would forgive him only if the food was gone by the next morning. Should the jinn not accept the offering, it would afflict the man and his family with a long-lasting illness. The concept of jinns likely originates from the Bedouins, who have roamed the deserts of Arabia for millennia. It represents the most ancient religious concept, dating back to Arabia's animistic period, and is considerably older than the Arab polytheistic tradition, which was later incorporated into standard Islam. Examples of jinns include the Qareen, pair of jinns, one benevolent, whispering to us to perform good actions in one ear, and one malevolent, tempting us to behave badly in the other ear. Hatif, an invisible jinn that warns you of impending danger. Sa'ir, a jinn appearing as a very old man with only one eye, a beard reaching his knees, very long teeth and toenails covered in iron, haunting desolate places. Waswas, jinns that inhabit the air and are responsible for the sound of the wind. Several jinns also govern the days of the week and the production of metals within the Earth's crust. Among the most powerful jinns are the Marids, the most rebellious and cunning among the jinns. The Marids practice magic and live in open seas. They often attempt to intercept messages from the angels in the sky to predict the future. When they get too close to the heavens, to keep them bound to the earth, gods strike them with shooting stars, as if stars were missiles. Another group of powerful jinns is the Afarit, winged titans bursting in flames, prone to anger and hostility, except when offerings are made to them, which they may reward. Sorcerers, known as Sha'ir, were said to control jinns and Afarit through poetry and animistic magic, either to keep them at bay or to use them against the enemies, thus supporting generals and tribal leaders. The Sha'ir were also believed to perform exorcisms, treat medical conditions, and inflict illnesses on the enemies with black magic by partially tying a knot, uttering a curse, and pulling the knot tight. Such curses could only be reversed if the knot was found and untied. The practice of sorcery was later banned in Islam, as it was believed to lead to the sin of shirk, associating partners with Allah, and it was punished with death. Other curious entities, possibly influenced by the Jewish and Mesopotamian tradition, are the giants known as Jabirun. Uj ibn Anak, for example, is a giant of such immense size that he could catch whales with his bare hands while being knee-deep in the ocean. Demons, such as Dulhath, man-like entities riding ostriches, believed to inhabit the Arabian coasts. These demons were feared for their use of black magic, and they were thought to be responsible for summoning storms at sea, causing ships to sink with the intention of devouring the corpses of sailors once washed ashore. Similarly, the areas surrounding villages and towns were said to be haunted by flesh-eating ogresses known as Ad-Dami, which preyed on wandering merchants and children left unattended under the cover of night. Devils, referred to as Shayatin, were believed to be formed from the blood of murdered people. These malevolent spirits were thought to instigate evil thoughts in the minds of men. According to ancient Arabian tradition, possession by Shayatin was common and mostly linked to mental illnesses or cited as the cause of people doing morally questionable things. Notable examples include Sut, the devil who pushes men to gossip and lie; Dasim, who sows discord between spouses; Zalambur, the instigator of fraud; and Awar, who tempts partners with the pleasure of infidelity. The Shayatin were rumored to gather in circles in the cemeteries, particularly around the graves of the most wicked people to have ever lived. In defense against these devils, Arabs would sometimes name their children after powerful animals, craft clay bowls inscribed with magic incantations, and place them in the corners of their homes to catch such malevolent entities. Last but not least are the Deevs, demons of Persian origin believed to be demonizations of the Hindu devas, and peris, fairies of Persian origin, akin to angels, mostly benevolent towards humans, and said to protect forests from those who attempted to damage or litter in them. Arabia is a land of extremes, oscillating between excessive dryness and sudden torrential rains. Particularly in Mecca, when rain does occur, it often takes the form of violent thunderstorms, accompanied by hailstones. The sheer volume of water can lead to flash floods, causing significant damage and resulting in numerous fatalities. For instance, in 600 AD, during the era of Muhammad, the Kaaba was damaged by a flash flood and subsequently rebuilt. Similarly, in 1627, 3 walls of the Kaaba collapsed due to flash floods and had to be reconstructed. Tribal conflicts, though rare, could erupt suddenly with dramatic consequences. For instance, the Kaaba endured a fire in 683 AD, was bombarded by catapults in 692 AD, and ultimately suffered damage at the hands of the Karmatians, who stole the black stone from the Kaaba and secreted it away in the oasis of Al-Asa in eastern Arabia. The Karmatians eventually demanded a hefty ransom for its return before selling it back to the Meccans. The lack of trust in both the environment and humans may have led Arabs to believe that by appeasing the deities with gifts and substantial sacrifices, such deities might have changed their fortune for the better. In fact, sacrifices in temples like the Kaaba were highly transactional. If the priests did not achieve the desired result, it often resulted in the petitioner's anger. The concept of Ramadan was transactional too, with the underlying intent being, "I will not consume your resources, O deity, so you will grant me more of this later." Meanwhile, the Tawaf, performed by ancient Arabs around the Kaaba 7 times, aimed to emulate the movement of the 7 major astronomical objects visible in the sky: the Sun, Moon, Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. This act, in essence, was either an attempt to unite with the universe or to expedite the seasons to get rain, rendering the Tawaf a rain-making ritual not very far from other rain dances found across Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Americas during the same period. The recurrence of the number 7, not only in pre-Islamic Arabia, but also in Judaism and other Semitic religions, likely originates from Mesopotamian culture, where it symbolized wholeness, completeness, and totality. For example, the Sumerian word for 7, Imim, was translated by the Akkadians as Kishatum, with the meaning of world and universe. Similarly, Babylonian mythology describes the universe as composed of 7 earths and 7 heavens, with most of their traditions and rituals incorporating the number 7 in them. Psychologist George A. Miller, in his research, The Magical Number 7, plus or minus 2, Some Limits on Our Capacity for Processing Information, writes that the average number of objects a human can hold in short-term memory is 7 plus or minus 2. This means that most humans can focus on 5 to 9 objects at a time, highlighting the number 7 as a limit of our brain's capacity. The concept of submission, upon final analysis, may arise as a reaction to the harshness of nature and consequently to the deities in pursuit of better living conditions. This principle is fundamental to Islam, where the very name Islam means submission to the will of God. This ideology likely evolved as a pragmatic strategy to ensure the survival of individuals in an environment where living conditions are otherwise extremely challenging. The idols that they invoke besides him have no power to intercede, except for those who bear witness to the truth knowingly. If you ask them, O Prophet, who created them, they will certainly say, Allah. If you ask them, O Prophet, who created the heavens and the earth, and subjected the sun and the moon to his will, they will certainly say, Allah. How then can they be so deluded and stray from the truth? Allah is aware of the Prophet's lament. O my Lord, indeed, these are a people who persist in disbelief. Early Muslims questioned the logic of pagans with severe disdain, while pagans attributed to Allah daughters and acknowledged Allah as their sole creator and as the creator of the heavens and the earth, a point affirmed by the Quran. For some inexplicable reason, among the hundreds of deities pagans worshipped, they specifically refused to worship Allah, the God most important among them. Yet, pre-Islamic sources, scarce due to the pagan Arabs' preference for oral tradition and the subsequent erasure of such sources within the expansion of Islam, suggest that pagans rarely mentioned Allah as a concept. Instead, the most worshipped deities were Venusian deities like Atar and thunderstorm deities like Baal, who brought rain, moon deities that guided merchants at night, and the three supposed daughters of Allah associated with creation, decision-making, protection, and destruction. This raises critical questions. Who or what was Allah precisely? What are his origins? Was he a deity already present in pre-Islamic Arabia, or did Muhammad introduce a new concept with the foundation of Islam? The earliest mentions of the word Allah date back to the 5th century AD, 2 centuries before the expansion of Islam, in the kingdom of Lihan. This kingdom either bordered Mecca to the south or exerted some influence over it. The name Allah appeared as a theophoric element in the names of some Lihanite inhabitants, such as Abdullah, which means servant or slave of Allah, among the theophoric elements of other deities, including Abdal-Uzza and Abdal-Manaf. Notably, the name of Prophet Muhammad's father was Abdullah ibn Abda al-Muttalib, indicating that from the 5th century onwards, some people began to incorporate the name Allah into their personal names. However, the name Allah was not unique to the kingdom of Lihan. In fact, it found cognates in many nearby civilizations, dating much earlier than the 5th century AD. While in the kingdom of Lihan, he was known as Allah, in Syriac Christian texts from 4 centuries earlier, he was known as Allaha. To the Aramaeans, 15 centuries prior, he was known as Allaha. To the Israelites, Phoenicians, and Ugaridians, 19 centuries prior, he was known as El and Eloah. And to the Mesopotamians, 36 centuries prior, he was known as Ilum. This demonstrates a significant cultural exchange among these civilizations, with the names Ila and Il found as far south as Yemen, similarly to how widespread the thunderstorm deity Baal was across the Middle East in the previous chapter. Therefore, the names Allah, Allaha, Elaha, El and Eloah, Ila and Il, and Ilum distinctly highlight that for thousands of years, these civilizations shared a similar concept of supreme deity, precisely that of the high god or highest god. Such high gods, like El or Eloah to the Israelites, and later Allah to the Arabs, was believed to have created the heavens and the earth, and to have given birth to sons and daughters who would later become gods, ruling over the natural world they created. In addition, they were thought to have created the angels, the spirits, the jinns, and the demons, to oversee the minor events of nature. Once their creation was complete, though, they would retreat into the farthest point of the universe they had created, into Aliyin for the Arabs and El Israelites, never to reveal themselves to their creation once more, except in the most desperate of times. In Latin, this concept is known as Deus Otiosos, the inactive God. Such high gods were said to be so powerful compared to the sons and daughters they had created that they could not be represented in any way, shape, or form, nor could they be called by their personal names to avoid disturbing them. This was because such a disturbance could immediately incur their wrath, causing havoc for humanity. This may explain why, if the pre-Islamic Arabs truly believed in Allah, why they never worshipped him or mentioned him within their temples. A common hypothesis attempting to explain why pre-Islamic Arabs might have shared a common belief in Allah suggests that the name Allah formed from the combination of al, the article meaning the, and ilah, meaning deity, to form al-ilah, which simply means the God. This implies that, among all deities, Allah was considered the God, and therefore the most important. This has led scholars to speculate that each pre-Islamic Arab tribe might have referred to its most important god as Allah. For example, the Allah worshipped by the Quraysh tribe might have been Hubal, whereas the Allah of the Sabaeans might have been Athtar, and of the Himyarites before Judaism, Al-Makkah, highlighting the possibility that each tribe might have shared a common name, Allah, and a common concept of highness, to identify the respective most important gods. This indicates that during the time of Muhammad, the Allah of Mecca might have been identified with Hubal. However, as Ibn Ishaq notes in Sirat Rasulallah, when Muhammad confronted the Quraysh at the Battle of Uhud, he invoked Allah, whereas the Quraysh called upon Hubal, which reduces the likelihood that they were referring to the same God. Lastly, the later spread of the word Allah in the kingdom of Lihian in the 5th century AD compared to its existence for thousands of years among the Syrians, Aramaeans, Israelites, and Mesopotamians, suggests that these civilizations may have influenced the northern Arabs to develop the concept of Allah over time. Indeed, with Judaism and Christianity spreading down throughout the Arabian Peninsula, Arab Jews and Arab Christians likely referred to their God as Allah, meaning the God, to underscore their monotheistic beliefs in contrast to the many alihah that the Arab polytheists were worshipping. This, in turn, could have influenced the pagan Arabs to consider the belief in a one and all-powerful God, the God Allah, over the many lesser deities they were worshipping at the time. What's more, while in the Kingdom of Israel, the Israelites gradually abandoned polytheism, and consequently, the worship of the high god El Elyon, to embrace monotheism by choosing one of his 70 sons, the God of the Old Testament Yahweh, as their supreme God. Muhammad, in his move towards monotheism, decided on a markedly different path. He took the high god Allah, discarded all the deities supposedly created by Allah according to pagan Arab beliefs, and gathered the powers of all such deities within Allah. Therefore, technically, Allah shares more similarities with El Elyon than with Yahweh. This technically is of crucial importance and contrasts with the fundamental thesis of the Quran, which states that Allah is the same God of the Jews and Christians, being Yahweh, the God of Abraham. In the Quran, in fact, we read, "Say, we believe in Allah, and what has been sent down to us, and what was sent down to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes, and in what was given to Moses in Jesus, and to the prophets from their Lord. We make no distinction between any of them, and we are Muslims submitting to Him. And do not argue with the people of the Scripture, except in a way that is best, except for those who commit injustice among them, and say, we believe in that which has been revealed to us and revealed to you. And our God and your God is one, and we are Muslims in submission to Him." To further complicate matters, in addition to Allah being closer to El Elyon than to Yahweh, Allah uses the plural form we when speaking in the Quran, such as in, "Do not those who disbelieve see that the heavens and the earth were a joint entity, and we separated them, and made from water every living thing?" This is similar to how the God of the Israelites is referred to in the Tanakh in the plural form as Elohim, which means gods, making Allah closer to Yahweh than to El Elyon. But despite Allah having 99 names, Yahweh, the personal name of God in Judaism, is not among them. Or is it? While the name Yahweh is never explicitly mentioned in the Quran as the official and personal name of Allah, with Islam's adoption of the Jewish tradition, all the Jewish prophets can be found in the Quran. One prophet in particular, Elijah, or Ilyas in Islam, whose name can be divided into Eli, meaning my God, and Jah, or Yah, meaning Yahweh, literally translates to my God is Yahweh. This nuance further reduces the likelihood that the Islamic God Allah is the same as Yahweh, the God preached by the Jewish prophets. This raises even more questions. Is Allah truly the same God of the Jews and Christians, the God of Abraham? Before diving into whether Islam stands on equal footing with Judaism and Christianity as an Abrahamic religion, and before we uncover how Muhammad revolutionized pre-Islamic Arabia, marking the end of this documentary, let's first briefly outline how Allah's creation of the world is depicted in the Quran. Allah first created the pen, and with it, wrote the story of creation from the beginning to the end of time. Allah first created 7 earths, which He laid out flat like carpets, stacking them one upon the other. Then He placed the earths on the back of Nun, a giant whale. But, because the whale's movements made the earths shake too much, He placed mountains like pegs on top of the earths to stabilize them and to reduce their motion. Next, Allah turned His attention to the sky. He gathered water from the oceans below to form the 7 heavens above, each separated by a distance of 500 years' walk, one from the next. He supported the weight of the closest sky, which is a canopy, with invisible pillars extending to the ground. Before this, His throne, in fact, had been upon water, and the earths and the heavens were a joined entity, and from water, Allah created all living things. In the first heaven, the sky closest to us, He placed lamps, known as stars, for decoration. Devils often attempt to steal information traveling through the sky to Allah, so Allah repels them by striking them with shooting stars to keep them bound to the earth. Allah created a shiny lamp called the sun, which rises in the east and runs in the sky towards a stopping point, and the moon, which too is a light, and the sun and moon follow each other in the sky, but they are not allowed to overtake each other. Night falls when Allah covers the sky with a veil, turning it black to remind His creatures to rest. He makes the sun rise in the east and to set it in the west, purportedly making it end in a muddy spring. There, Allah waits for the sun to prostrate before Him, and for the sun to seek permission to rise again the next day. Allah drives the clouds and brings them together to bring the rain, and to send the wind. Rainwater is pure water, and a proof of His mercy. Allah sends rain down from the sky. He blesses with rain whom He wills, and punishes with thunderbolts and hailstones whom He wills. To separate drinking water from undrinkable water, He placed an invisible barrier between rivers, ending in oceans, that prevents them from mixing. Allah made the sky perfect and without any cracks. However, He can make pieces of sky fall on those who disbelieve in Him. Allah is also capable of folding the sky as if it was a scroll, and to cover it with a veil to bring the night, because the sun and moon do not directly cause day and night. Allah also creates the shadows, and can extend them how He wills. He could have chosen to keep shadows remain still, but He chose the sun to be their guide. Allah also holds the birds up in the sky. Without His will, they could not fly, and He is the one who steers the ships through the sea. But if Allah, one day, when the sun reaches his resting point, does not allow the sun to rise again, and commands the sun to rise from the west instead, this will be a sign of the day of apocalypse. He will cover the sky with smoke, and He will cause the sky to split apart, and He will make the stars fall from the sky down on the earth, and He will cause the sun to fold up, and the seas to overflow, and the mountains to vanish, and the moon to split in two, and the earthquakes to destroy the grounds, and to make the moon rise from the east and the sun to rise from the west to make them collide, and Jesus, Son of Mary, to descend once more, to break the cross, to kill all pigs, and to abolish the jizya tax, causing the peoples to be gathered for judgment, because the trumpet will sound, decreeing the end of time. Both in pre-Islamic times and shortly after the expansion of Islam, the world was envisioned as resting on the back of a colossal whale, or an immensely large fish named Bahamut. This fish served as the foundation supporting our world above the waters of the Tiamat, the ocean of chaos. Atop this fish, it was said, there resided a bull named Kuyuta, on whose back there was a ruby, and on this ruby, in turn, stood an angel so immense in size and power that he could bear on his shoulders the 7 earths and the 7 heavens Allah created. Beneath Bahamut, residing in the depths of the ocean of chaos, in the Tiamat, there resided Falak, a great dragon or sea serpent in the realm of fire, whose power and anger were said to be so devastating that Allah himself was said to keep such a creature in check to not cause chaos over his creation. Scholars see in Bahamut the behemoth of the Israelites, while in Falak, the Leviathan, both creatures thought to have been created by the Most High deities El Elyon, Yahweh, and Allah, at the beginning of creation in the Semitic tradition at large. Finally, it can be observed that Allah, similar to how Marduk created the world in Babylonian mythology, by separating fresh water from salt water and organizing the world into 7 heavens and 7 earths, also performs a very similar action by structuring the world in the same manner and by creating everything starting from water. Therefore, all things considered, the story of how Allah created the world, although largely original, compared to the other myths of the surrounding civilizations, is fundamentally similar in structure, or a mix of the trend of Mesopotamian and Semitic mythologies at large. Despite this idea being maintained until the 18th century, as proven by past Islamic exegesis regarding the verse 68:1 of the Quran, with the arrival of new scientific discoveries, the belief that Allah created the world and placed it on the back of a whale has become unpopular. Now, instead of the whale, interpretations only mention Nun without explaining what it is. Abraham, the prophet at the core of Judaism, and subsequently of Christianity and Islam, is one of the most mysterious and enigmatic figures history has ever conceived. Born around the year 2000 BCE in the Mesopotamian city of Ur, Abraham's father, Terah, was a craftsman who made wooden and stone idols of the Mesopotamian deities for a living. From the beginning of his childhood, Abraham was curious and questioned, "What purpose do these idols serve, Father? They do not move, they cannot see nor hear, nor can they harm or benefit us. Why do people pray to them, offer them the best food, and cry before them in temples?" To which his father would reply, "Abraham, stop insulting our traditions and ancestors." Sometimes, unbeknownst to his father, Abraham would take the idols his father had crafted and try to drown them in the nearby river to see if the idols would display any form of struggle or resistance. Noticing that nothing would happen, Abraham questioned, "How can these idols be my gods? Where is my God?" he wondered. Terah despised his son Abraham for his rebellious behavior, which he viewed as blasphemous, since Abraham insulted the gods and the traditions of his ancestors. Nonetheless, he had no option but to task Abraham with selling such idols in the local market to make a living. In the market, Abraham would shout, "Who wants to buy these idols? They can neither harm nor benefit you." Then he began to insult them in front of everyone, to which the people in the market would reply, "Abraham, stop insulting our traditions and ancestors." Abraham then ascended a nearby mountain during the night to ponder, "Can my God be this star? It cannot be, for the star disappears by day. Can my God be the moon? No, for it too vanishes with the arrival of the day. Can my God be the sun? No, for it also disappears with the arrival of the night." Abraham came to realize that God could be none other than the creator of the heavens and the earth, and of everything that surrounded him. That was God. Upon this realization, God appeared to Abraham, thus saying, "O Abraham, prostrate yourself to me." And Abraham did so until nightfall. Abraham's rebellious behavior did not go unnoticed for very long, though. His behavior, perceived as blasphemous, caught the attention of the local temple priests and of the Babylonian king Nimrod. To punish the young man, King Nimrod ordered that Abraham's hands be tied and that he be catapulted into the world's largest fire, so immense that even birds flying overhead would burn. However, as soon as Abraham was about to be thrown into the fire, God made the fire cool and pleasant to the touch. When Abraham emerged without any injury, the people understood that the God of Abraham was indeed the true God. Nimrod, the Babylonian king who believed himself to be a god, fearful of losing his throne, attempted to debate Abraham by asking, "What can your God do that I cannot?" Abraham replied, "My God gives life and death." Nimrod retorted, "I too can give life and death. I can take a person from the street and sentence them to death, or I can take a person condemned to death and grant them mercy, saving their life." Abraham then said, "My God makes the sun rise from the east. Can you, Nimrod, make it rise from the west?" Confused, Nimrod felt defeated, and young Abraham won the debate. Abraham then left the city of Ur, wandering through the deserts to the east in search of the land promised by God. In Canaan, God blessed Abraham with offspring, and together with Sarah, he became the father of Isaac, a son who would give rise to the tribes of Israel. With a concubine named Hagar, Abraham also had Ishmael, a son whose descendants would give rise to the tribes of the Ishmaelites, and hence the Arabs. In the Islamic tradition, Abraham, along with Ishmael, traveled south of Israel, crossing the deserts to Mecca. Here, they are said to have rebuilt the Kaaba, a structure that had existed since the time of Abraham, and that had been destroyed by the Great Flood. In summary, Abraham fathered two sons, Isaac and Ishmael, who would give rise to the Israelites and to the Arabs respectively. The name Abraham itself says it all, meaning father of nations, underscoring his role as a common ancestor from whom various civilizations believe they came from. Another example similar to Abraham's role as a creator of nations is the prophet Shem, son of Noah, who, after the Great Flood, had many sons, including Aram, Ashur, Elam, Lud, among others. The names of his sons are not coincidental. In fact, they are the initials of the civilizations they would found, such as the Aramaeans, Assyrians, Elamites, and Lydians. Thus, Shem is considered the common ancestor of the Semitic peoples at large. Similarly, another prophet called Ham had sons named Cush, Mizraim, and Canaan, giving rise to the Kushite civilization, the ancient Egyptians, and the Canaanite civilization respectively. It appears that before the concept of nationhood, as we understand it today, existed, people living in tribes and clans traced their origins to their ancestors, building their identity on top of theirs. Our ancestors recognized that, while both friends and enemies are humans, and therefore descendants of Adam, different prophets led to the creation of different lands, of which lands they became the founding heroes. The historical existence of Abraham, as primarily depicted in biblical and Quranic sources, rather than historical records, remains uncertain. Scholars often view the story of Abraham as a mythological story, created to describe the origins of the Israelites and the Arabs, rather than a historical event. Most importantly, Abraham's journey from Ur in Mesopotamia to the Levant may represent the movement of the Semitic peoples across this region, reflective of the historical migrations that occurred in the ancient Near East during the millennia. Professor of Theology Ernst Knauf of Bern University, Switzerland, points out that Assyrian and Babylonian inscriptions, such as the Annals of Sennacherib, have long referred to the Ishmaelites as Shumu Ilu. According to these annals, the Shumu Ilu tribes were located at the border of the Babylonian Empire and, over time, moved westward through the deserts, led by their leader, Uaiti Ben-Birdada. Ernst Knauf furthermore notes that in the northern part of Arabia, the Shumu Ilu tribes were known as Shama'il, and in West Semitic, the name is rendered as Yishmael, dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE. One of Ishmael's sons, according to the Bible and the Quran, is Kedar, who gave rise to the Kedarite tribes, specifically the Arabs with whom the Israelites interacted the most. The Kedarites in the Bible are generally described as a semi-nomadic group known for their skills in archery and camel breeding. They are often depicted as living in tents, indicative of a pastoral nomadic lifestyle, and were engaged in trade, especially in the incense trade routes that connected the Arabian Peninsula with the Mediterranean Sea. The most important deities of the Kedarites were Athtar and Alat. They maintained a mostly positive relationship with the Israelites and were largely bilingual, with their second language being Aramaic for trade purposes, making them culturally close to the Israelites. Coming back to the story of Abraham, although we lack historical evidence to verify his existence, Abraham may represent a profound reality of his era. Indeed, by 2000 BCE, after thousands of years of glory, the Sumerian civilization was in decline, with the city of Ur standing as the last vestige of its ancient splendor. The Sumerians, overwhelmed by the invasion of the Amorites from the east, found themselves assimilated by these invaders. Once in power, the Amorites established the Babylonian Empire, absorbing the Sumerian identity into itself once and for all. The Sumerians, who had managed this land in freedom for so many millennia, now accused their deities of not having protected them, or even of being false, because if their gods had been true, they would not have been overwhelmed by the Amorites. Thus, the Sumerians had lost their land, and the only way to rebuild everything would be to do so somewhere else, wherever a new, true God would allow it and protect them. And this God could not be the thousands of weak deities like the idols that Terah was crafting, but had to be only one omnipotent God, always present near to his worshippers. Therefore, the story of Abraham might reflect a reality that had existed for millennia in the Middle East, a signal of the loss of faith in the traditional polytheistic deities, a phenomenon that occurred whenever a civilization was on the brink of collapse. Whenever a civilization would collapse, the people lost the trust in their gods, leading to the search for an increasingly more powerful God who could protect them and unify them. A similar situation occurred with the Philistines, a group likely of Greek origin who settled alongside the Israelites in the land of Canaan during the Bronze Age collapse. Initially worshipping Greek gods, the Philistines, forced to flee their homeland, ended up losing faith in their deities. Consequently, the Philistines, feeling abandoned by their native deities, adopted the gods common to the other peoples of Canaan, the land that offered them refuge. The story of Abraham accurately reflects the condition of Arabia during the time of Muhammad. During that era, Arabia had been in a prolonged phase of disorder and anarchy that compromised the security of trade routes. The interference of foreign powers such as the Romans and Sassanids, together with the arrival of the Jewish refugees, gave rise to deep religious and political divisions. These circumstances forced the Arab tribes to choose sides and allies to support. Jewish influence was dominant in southern Arabia, while Christian missionaries were converting the rest of the Arabian Peninsula. On the eve of Islam, traditional Arab polytheism was in rapid decline, swiftly being replaced by the growing adherence to foreign monotheistic faiths such as Judaism and Christianity. The scarcity of pagan temples in major cities like Mecca and Medina demonstrates how much polytheism had lost its social influence, now confined to the private sphere. Just as Abraham's search for God was stimulated by the collapse of his civilization following the arrival of the Amorites, Arabs too began to reject idolatry, influenced by the increasing presence of Judaism and Christianity in the Arabian Peninsula. Arabs started to view Abraham as a hero to admire and emulate, identifying with him. This shift occurred because the Arab polytheistic deities, similar to the Mesopotamian ones in the story of Abraham, were perceived as incapable of protecting the Arabs from the increasing influence of foreign powers. Among the Arabs most eager for change was a group known as Hanif, monotheistic Arabs, among whom Muhammad stood out. Rather than opposing the spread of Judaism and Christianity in the Arabian Peninsula, the Hanifs chose to embrace both faiths. They began to align with Jews and Christians against the polytheists, incorporating the principles of these two religions into the emerging monotheistic religion of Islam, while still retaining a distinct Arab identity. Under the guidance of Muhammad, major changes were set to transform religious practices and places of worship in Arabia once and for all. The Kaaba, previously a temple dedicated to 360 pagan deities, became the temple of the only God, Allah. This transformation redefined the Kaaba from a pagan temple into an Abrahamic one, considered the house of Allah. It is said to have been first built by the Prophet Adam, exactly where Allah dropped the black stone from the sky, and later rebuilt by the prophets Abraham and Ishmael after the Great Flood. The hills of Safa and Marwa, near the Kaaba, where pagans performed tawaf in honor of the deities Isaf and Na'ilah, were reinterpreted. This new practice for Muslims was connected to the Abrahamic story of Hagar's desperate search for water in the desert for her son Ishmael. The concept of submission underwent a fundamental change in orientation, from obedience in nature and its deities to the obedience to the sole deity Allah. Ramadan, originally celebrated to show respect for nature to obtain more water and food, was now dedicated solely to the worship of Allah. The Tawaf, whose circular movement aimed to synchronize the believers with the movement of the planets and stars to influence the seasons and bring rain, was reinterpreted as a reminder to center one's life on the obedience to Allah. Consequently, the pilgrimage of Hajj took on a new meaning. It became a rite of purification from sins, performed exclusively around the house of Allah. From the Christian tradition, Islam adopted numerous concepts, except for the crucifixion of Jesus. During the time of Muhammad, many Arab Christians, criticized by the Jews, who believed it was impossible for their God to die on a cross, thus denying Jesus' divinity, ended up embracing Docetism. This theological stance argues that Jesus did not truly die or suffer on the cross, but only appeared to do so, as an allusion to the believers. Numerous Islamic concepts originate from the Jewish tradition, including mythical beings such as the Leviathan and the Behemoth, as well as prophets and daily rituals. Initially, Muhammad directed his followers to pray towards the city of Jerusalem. However, after moving from Mecca to Medina and being mocked for the first time by Jews for his interpretation of the Torah, he decided to change the Qibla, the direction of prayer, from Jerusalem to Mecca. The concept of Jumu'ah, the Islamic day of rest and congregation, similar to the Jewish Sabbath, likely stems from the Jewish merchants in Arabia who held the market on Friday, enabling them to observe the Sabbath on Saturday. Therefore, the day chosen for Jumu'ah in Islam aligns with the pre-Islamic Jewish market day, the day of gathering at the market, already familiar to the local population. Finally, it would be a mistake to assume that the desire for such radical change in Arabia was exclusive to Muhammad. The history of pre-Islamic Arabia is filled with prophets. During Muhammad's time, in fact, there was another prophet named Musaylima, who similarly attempted to carry significant reforms to Arabia. Musaylima proposed reducing the daily prayers to 3 instead of the 5 dictated by Muhammad, criticized polygamy while tolerating extramarital sex, and advocated for abandoning supernatural interpretations in favor of rational explanations for the unknown. Of course, Prophet Musaylima was killed by the followers of Prophet Muhammad, and his reforms never took hold, but perhaps this is precisely how we should view prophets, as the founding fathers of their nation's identities. Kings, much like prophets, declared themselves to be chosen by God. The distinction between prophets and kings, however, lies that, while the latter claimed divine origins to dominate their subjects, prophets were ordinary men who, with compelling ideas, captivated vast numbers of common people like themselves. They were so persuasive of their beliefs that they provided these masses of common people with a figure to identify with themselves. Simply put, a prophet is chosen, a king is not. This explains why Islam expanded across all corners of Arabia within just a decade. Although it appeared very different on the surface, to the Arabs, it somehow felt very familiar at the same time. Researching, writing, voiceover, and editing videos like these require a substantial amount of time, effort, and resources. Specifically, a combined effort of 6 months for this video alone. We are a small team of 3, and YouTube ad revenue falls very short of covering our operational costs. If you find these videos informative and worthwhile, please consider supporting our work through Patreon or with a super thanks here on YouTube. Thank you for watching. We hope we have addressed most of the doubts you may have had about this topic. Congratulations for reaching the end. Lastly, we wish you a wonderful day.